So I got stuck in Greenland. I was supposed to be there for 5 days, and on like day three, I'm looking at the weather report and I see really bad weather, and I was warned by people that like yeah, expect delays. If with the weather like this, it's probably gonna be bad. It should be fine, but just expect delays. But it was like really bad weather. I don't have any footage of how bad the wind was. There aren't really any trees in Nook, so like your normal visual way of seeing how windy it is, without experiencing it, unless you're like near like a flag, or you're near like water and you can see whitecaps, and like you can't see how strong the winds were. They were really powerful. It was like I'm walking down the street, I can't even stand up. It was like knocking me over. And it was like that for a few days. Just to back up, so I was supposed to be in Iceland for all of November. I was going to be in Greenland before that, for about 5 days, and but the plan was that was kind of like a greedy thing, like, oh, I'm going to be in Iceland, and Greenland is nearby, and Greenland is a hard place to get to. So I was like, let's check that out before NaNoWriMo. But the plan, Iceland is the country that has the world's most books written per capita. So I was looking at that statistic and I was like, well, if I want to write, then it seems like that's a good place to be. So that was the plan. But I was looking at Google Maps, and like I want to go to Greenland, and it's such a hard place to get to. It's, you only can fly there from Iceland or from Denmark. You can't even fly directly to the capital from Denmark. The runways in Nuuk are too small. The airport is too small. For big international planes, for flights that long, like it just can't accommodate. Yeah, so I went, and I was supposed to be back in Iceland in November, and then my flight got canceled, and then my flight got canceled again, and then I had to rebook, and I ended up being there for way longer, and I was there for a lot of for a good amount of November, and I had to start NaNoWriMo there. So to give an idea, Greenland as a whole has only about 55,000 people. And Nuuk, which is the capital, has 19,000 people. The closest town, the closest settlement, they call them settlements there. There are towns of like a couple thousand people, and there's a handful of those, but there's a lot of these little settlements that are like 200 people, 100 people, and like to give you an idea of how kind of remote this place is. The closest town to Nuuk is a place called Kabasitlet, which is 2.5 hours away by boat. Roads don't connect any of the towns or settlements or cities in Greenland. There's no roads between anything. So this little settlement is 2.5 hours away by boat, and the population is 54. And that's the closest place anyone lives. From the capital. Like outside the capital. So like it was a combination of the bad weather and like that aspect of Greenland, that it is a really small place, like a really remote place. They don't have flights every day. The airport is closed on weekends, and I had to get a COVID test to come back to Iceland, and the testing center is closed on weekends, so I had to schedule my flight around that. I had to rebook my flight around that. Yeah, so I was supposed to be there for 5 days, got stuck for longer than that, and I ended up having to start my whole writing project in Greenland. Okay, so the general idea behind all this, of like being somewhere else to write, and like going to like an interesting place to write, I'm generally really into soaking up the creative energy of a place, and I don't mean that like in a mystical way. I mean it like in a really practical way, of like you surround yourself with creative stimuli and it actually energizes you. But like I think this principle, I think I got it from Ali Brosh, who also known as Hyperbole and a Half. And I don't remember the exact line, and I tried to look it up and I couldn't find like the actual quote, but it was something like as a creative person, we need to balance production with consumption, right? And the idea there is that, like, you know, we definitely pressure ourselves to just like produce, but like if you don't have material going in, you know, you need like ingredients to kind of put into like your head blender, you know, and then like the synapses can like do their thing and digest it, and then you get good ideas, you know, like that's kind of how I see it working. So like muse food, you gotta feed the muse, and then the muse is happy, and it gives us little presents, you know. Yeah. So that was the idea, and that's kind of what I wanted to cover in this video, and just in this introduction video, you know, just like charting my progress with this. I want to trace the process through the raw material that I got from being here, you know, from being in the north, you know, out of my normal environment, you know, surrounded by all of these new stimuli, you know, all this culture and this history and everything, you know, and I wanted to trace that. I wanted to trace that through how I deal with that and what I get inspired by, and then how that becomes a story in the end, you know. And you know, I'd originally been planning to be inspired by just Iceland, but you know, honestly, Greenland was a really inspiring place as well. So I am thankful for that. But let's get into the actual raw material here.
My name is Auskelver, and I am the youngest of 6 siblings who live at home with mom and dad. In the evenings, I sit with the others in the living chamber and knit socks and mittens, while my older brother sings rhymes. Usually my daddy sings for us, but he is not at home now. Some man came to pick him up, and they might burn him on a fire at Thingvellir. But it's not true that my daddy is bad. He has only been trying to help people who are sick. Mommy often cries in the evenings when she thinks I'm asleep. If my daddy dies, I know he will go to heaven.
So this was in the National Museum of Iceland in Reykjavik, and you know, there's a bunch of interesting stuff, beautiful stuff. But there's this little table, and it has a bench, and there's a pair of headphones, and like it's literally one of these things you can miss if you're just walking by. And you can go there and you can sit and listen to little parts of Icelandic sagas. I don't know why they chose this one. It's so obscure I cannot find anything about it online. But it's, you know, I listened to this clip and it's this little girl speaking in her beautiful Icelandic accent. You know, this vague but heartfelt child's perception of the taboo of her father's sorcery. You know, and it was just so, you know, like, hearing about a time and place like that from that kind of perspective, you know, that's the kind of thing that really just kind of like wow, like that gets my mind going, you know. And I love the fact that there's only the small part of the story. It's that you know, that's something which is so much better creatively, you know, because your mind starts filling in the blanks, and you know, you're wondering like, okay, so what ended up happening? Did the father end up getting executed? The father end up getting burnt? You know, how did this girl grow up? You know, how did she eventually perceive this with a culture that I'm sure she was surrounded by a culture which was, you know, actively embracing this taboo of sorcery. You know, this Christian society. And you know, that was completely intolerant towards like her family's ways and her father's ways, the kind of the old ways. You know, but how did she feel about that? Because she obviously loved her father very much, and like did she become a sorceress too? How did her father's like eventual fate impact how she practiced? You know, did she become, was she more careful? You know, was she you know, was she rebellious, you know, against it at first, but she eventually had to turn to it, you know, embrace it. Yeah, and then in the same vein, I found this.
One of the other cultures that's most abundantly witnessed in the Old Norse sagas is the Sami. These are the indigenous people of northern Scandinavia who come into Scandinavia from a completely different route from the Indo-European speaking peoples who would give rise to the Old Norse language and in modern times the continental languages such as Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian. The Sami speak a Finno-Ugric language distantly related to Finnish. Now, the way they're looked at in the sagas is very similar, and this isn't surprising given the kind of roughly analogical cultural relationship, very similar to the way that American Indians are often portrayed in the more stereotypical kind of Western movies. Kind of magical, right? They've got some kind of an aura of mystique about them and the things that they do.
Okay, so granted, Sami people, obviously don't have anything to do with Iceland. They're in northern Scandinavia, in Norway, Sweden, Finland, People from the south have this mystique about the north, that it's this place that's so inhospitable, it's so rough, and the people there need to be tougher, and they need to be, hardy in order to live in such like a bare bones kind of society, a bare bones home environment, a bare bones society. But there's this trade-off that they totally think is worth it of not only being in nature and being connected with nature, but being in a place. You can either be in a place where it's easy to live, but everyone wants to go there, and it has people, or you can be in a place away from all that pettiness and sneakiness and politics, and you can be in a place that's remote. Game of Thrones, excellent example of this. The North is so no nonsense. It's not very wealthy. They don't have much. But they're not petty and they're not political, and they're very kind of straightforward and principled. And this winter's coming. We're all on the same side, or we better be. Kind of mantra is what kind of infuses not just the culture, but like the North, like that region, people who live there in general. But going back to the Sami people and that thing from Jackson Crawford, that's really what caught my interest actually being here. That there's this cultural shift from the south to the north, but then like from north to the Arctic, then there's another shift, and it's no longer like this our version of our civilization, but tougher and more bare bones. It's an entirely different paradigm. With the Sami people, it's reindeer hunting. And with the Inuits, it's hunting seal and polar bear and whales. And like it's like there's not a it's not just a difference in degree between agricultural societies and like a hunter-gatherer society. You see the difference like play out in like the spirituality and religion of these places. That like with Nordic peoples, there's the sense of like Christianity was spreading north, and it was kind of Christianity fading into this paganism of the north, with the pantheon of Nordic gods, and like the saga with the little girl that I played of like this there's the kind of like a holdout in the north of still being influenced by like these northern ancient ways of paganism. But then you go further north and it's not even paganism, it's animism, this entirely different, even more ancient, we're talking tens of thousands of years, ancient perspective of like it's the total merging of the real and the spiritual into like there's no barrier, like it's all one for them. So seeing those kinds of differences, seeing the aesthetic differences. I mean, the clothes are different, because of the type of society that they live in. Like with the, with how much warmer they need to be, what materials they do have, the skins. You get brighter colors for some reason, So that's that was really fascinating to me. Like there's, even though I just got done talking about how it's a different paradigm. It's not just a continuum. There is like this continuum of like a feeling of what the West kind of haughtily calls civilization, being powerless to penetrate a place, to penetrate that far north, places that are too rough, too inhospitable for like the civilized ways of life to take hold, and like in Greenland, that's how it is. The people still hunt, even in the capital. Then it's not a hunter-gatherer society anymore, but it is a merger between like modern life and a hunter-gatherer society. The professionals who live there, the doctors, the lawyers, the people who work in government and schools and stuff like that, they go out and hunt reindeer, every year. They hunt seals and they eat whale meat, and it does feel like it's because the like modernity, like that aspect of modern civilization, can't take hold in a place like that. Like it is too far north. It's more efficient for the people to live that way. And with that kind of barrier of the north, you get this preservation of these ancient ways of life, and these cultures, which in modern eyes feel more vibrant. They feel more authentically human somehow. That's at least that's the fantasy and that's the mythos of it all, and that's what's really inspiring. To kind of experience firsthand. So I obviously I can't actually write about these cultures. Like I'm not an academic in these areas, right? I really don't know much about these things other from what I've experienced firsthand. But that phenomenon of the shift in cultures and the types of culture, that was what really interested me. So I thought of a story that takes place in a forest, where the trees are not just big, but they're like miles high, like miles and miles and miles high. And it would be about someone who lives on the surface and goes on a journey to climb to the top. And they discover other cultures living higher than theirs. And it's about just all the different types of cultures as they change with the with the altitude, and adapt to the inhospitable conditions of people living higher and higher up these trees, like these whole civilizations, these whole ways of life, living at various altitudes, at like within this like enormous forest. And watching life go from like the cultural trappings that the main character is used to, of like civilization, and watching it get more raw and more rough, but also more real. So that became the kernel of the idea that I started working on.